I grew up in a quiet part of Oregon with my twin brother, Aaron. From the outside, we appeared to be any other middle-class family. 2 kids, a hardworking father, and a mother who filled the house with warmth and structure. But even in childhood, Aaron and I were never quite the same. We shared a birthday and a last name, but that's about where the similarities ended. I was cautious, always clinging to routines and expectations. Aaron, on the other hand, was impulsive, intense, and restless in a way that both worried and fascinated me. By the time we were 15, Aaron had already started sneaking alcohol into the house. At first, it was just a couple of missing beers from Dad's garage stash. But it escalated fast, vodka hidden in water bottles, disappearing for hours, slurred arguments at dinner. I remember finding him passed out on the back porch one night in the middle of December. I stayed up until he stirred, wrapping my coat around him and crying quietly into the sleeve. Our bond was complicated. I loved him fiercely, but I also feared what he was becoming. Aaron had this ability to charm everyone, teachers, neighbors, even my friends. But underneath, he was angry. And that anger boiled over the year we turned 17. It was Thanksgiving, and the tension had been building all day. Our dad, who rarely lost his temper, made a pointed comment about Aaron being drunk again. That was all it took. Aaron stood up, his face red with rage, and punched our father square in the jaw. I can still hear the sound of the impact, the sudden silence that fell over the room, and the way my mother's wine glass trembled in her hand. My dad didn't hit him back. He just walked out of the room without a word, holding his face, eyes unreadable. After that, something had to give. A few weeks later, Aaron checked into rehab. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No teary goodbyes, no promises. Just a quiet morning, a packed bag, and my mother crying as the car pulled away. We all supported him, each in our way. I visited every weekend, sitting in the bland, overly bright room as he talked about triggers and trauma and how sorry he was. I wanted to believe him, and maybe deep down I did. 10 years passed. Aaron moved to Washington, got married to a woman named Leah, and had a little girl they named Rosie. They came down for holidays sometimes, and he looked, well, different. Calmer. He didn't drink. He had a decent job, a nice house, and a way of talking about fatherhood that made me think he'd finally found some kind of peace. Rosie adored him, clinging to his leg and calling him her silly daddy. I used to watch them from across the room, trying to align this Aaron with the boy who'd once thrown a bottle at our mother and sobbed in my arms the night after. I wanted so badly to believe that things had changed, that we'd moved on, that sometimes people do find their way back. Thanksgiving that year felt almost idyllic at first. Mark and I drove down early in the morning, bringing a pumpkin pie I'd made the night before and a bottle of wine his coworker had recommended. My parents' house smelled like rosemary and butter, the same way it always did in late November. Aaron and Leah were already there when we arrived, their daughter Rosie chasing our father's dog around the yard, her laughter rising over the hum of conversation. Everything seemed calm, peaceful, and even. My mother had set the table with the good china, and my dad had that particular glow he always got when all his children were under one roof. Aaron was joking with Mark about fantasy football, and Leah was helping in the kitchen, humming along to an old song on the radio. I remember feeling grateful. I remember thinking, maybe this time, we'll get through it without any drama. Dinner was delicious, and for a while, the conversation flowed like warm cider. Easy, pleasant, familiar. After dessert, Mark stepped into the living room with Aaron to continue their football talk. I stayed back to help clear the dishes, distracted by Rosie tugging at my sleeve and asking for more whipped cream. It happened so quickly, I didn't even hear the beginning of the argument. Just the sound of raised voices, then a sharp, unmistakable crack. By the time I got to the living room, Mark was on the floor, clutching his jaw, and Aaron was standing over him, fists clenched, his face wild with something I hadn't seen in years. I froze. Everything inside me dropped. It felt like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Rosie had burst into tears. Leah stood stunned, her hands to her mouth. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, rushing to Mark's side. He was dazed, red-faced, and barely able to speak. "Are you drunk?" But Aaron didn't look drunk. He didn't smell like alcohol either. Still, my mind went straight to the past. To the Thanksgiving years ago. To the pattern I thought we had left behind. "He said something disgusting," Aaron snapped. "I wasn't going to let him get away with it." "What? What did he say?" I looked at Mark, but he didn't answer, just stared at the floor like he was trying to hold something back. My father stepped in then, pulling Aaron away, but not yelling, not even scolding. My mother took Rosie out of the room. That's when it hit me. The mood in the room hadn't turned against Aaron. It had turned against us. My dad looked at me with disappointment. My mother didn't even ask if Mark was okay. Later, when we were alone in the guest room, I pressed Mark for answers. "What happened out there? What did you say to him?" He shrugged. "Nothing. I joked about something stupid." He overreacted. That night, I texted Aaron. I just wanted to understand. I wanted to hear his side without all the noise and emotion. But hours passed. No response. The next morning, I opened my phone to check if he'd replied and saw that the message was gone. I frowned. I knew I'd sent it. I always double-checked. I asked Mark if he'd seen me texting Aaron. "You were upset," he said, not looking up from his coffee. I figured it was better not to stir things up more. I stared at him. "Did you delete my message?" "It wasn't important. You were tired." His tone was calm, almost soothing. Like he'd done me a favor. Something in me shifted then, not panic exactly, but a cold, creeping awareness. The story wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. And maybe, just maybe, I was missing pieces that had been right in front of me all along. When we got back home from Thanksgiving, everything felt colder, not just the weather, but the air between Mark and me. We went through the motions, unpacking bags, feeding the cat, putting away leftovers we hadn't touched. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if Aaron's punch was some bizarre overreaction that we'd all just forget in time. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the look on Aaron's face. About how my parents didn't rush to Mark's defense. About Rosie crying in Leah's arms. That night, I told Mark I was going to call Aaron. He stiffened. "Why?" "I just want to talk to him. Clear the air." "There's nothing to clear," he said, sharp and sudden. He attacked me. "He's a drunk. He's unstable. You seriously want to get in touch with him after what he did to me?" His voice rose with each word, until the air between us was thick with something I couldn't quite name. I backed down, lowering my gaze. "Okay," I said softly. "You're right. It can wait." He studied me for a moment, as if trying to decide whether I meant it. I forced a small smile, then turned away to fold some laundry. That night, I curled up beside him like everything was fine. I laughed at the show he picked. I kissed his cheek before falling asleep. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I grabbed my phone and locked myself in the guest room. I called Aaron. He picked up on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call," he said, his voice raw, tired. "What happened?" I whispered. "Please, just tell me. I need to know." There was a pause. Then he said, "I didn't hit him for nothing." I stayed silent. I walked into the living room after dessert, he continued. Rosie was watching a cartoon on her tablet. Mark was sitting near her, a little too close. He didn't hear me come in at first. He was staring at her in a way that made my skin crawl. Leaning in, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then he touched her shoulder. Just for a second. But it was wrong.
I saw it. And he saw me see it.
He stood up fast, tried to laugh it off. I didn't think. I just hit him. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I wish I weren't." The silence on the line was unbearable. "I didn't say anything right away," Aaron added. "I didn't want to ruin everything if I was wrong. But I'm not. You know I'm not." I wanted to scream at him. Tell him he was overreacting, that Mark would never. But the words stuck in my throat. Because I remembered the deleted message. His calm explanation. The way he'd looked at me when I said I wanted to call my brother. I thanked Aaron in a voice I barely recognized, and hung up. I stared at the wall for what felt like hours. When Mark called from the hallway asking if I wanted coffee, I smiled and said yes. I acted normally all day. I let him kiss me. I let him talk about work. I even laughed when he made a dumb joke about our neighbor's dog. But something inside me had shifted. A quiet scream was building in the back of my mind. I didn't know what to believe yet. I wasn't ready to destroy my life based on something I hadn't seen with my own eyes. But I knew this much. I couldn't pretend anymore. From that moment on, I started watching. Every move, every glance, every word. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his witness. The next few days, I moved through life like I was underwater, watching, listening, waiting. Mark didn't seem to notice. If anything, he looked relieved that things were back to normal. I cooked dinner. I laughed at his stories. I even went to bed with him, lying still as his arm draped over me. But the second he left for work each morning, the act dropped. On Thursday, once I was sure he'd gone, I began searching. I started with his home office. Mark was meticulous. Everything labeled, organized, arranged, but I knew him well enough to spot the cracks. A locked drawer in his desk stood out right away. I knew he kept a spare key taped under the shelf in the garage, a trick he thought was clever. My hands shook as I brought it back to the desk. Inside were a few folders of tax documents, an old phone, and a plain black flash drive. I didn't hesitate. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the only folder on it, labeled Invoices. At first, I saw pictures of receipts and work files. But then I found a subfolder buried at the bottom. When I opened it, my stomach turned. They were photos of children. Not pornographic, not explicitly criminal, but deeply wrong. Secretive shots at playgrounds, little girls on swings, kids playing in backyards. Unmistakably invasive. Some of the images were of Rosie, taken through windows, at a park, in a car. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands went numb. I slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom, vomiting until my ribs ached. Aaron was right. He had been telling the truth all along. And I had defended a man who watched his niece like prey. I called Aaron immediately, my voice trembling as I told him what I'd found. He didn't sound surprised, just quiet.
Sad.
Like he'd been waiting for this call. "I'm coming over," he said. "We need to go to the police. You can't stay there." I locked the flash drive in my purse and stood by the window, waiting. When I saw his car pull into the driveway, I opened the door before he could knock. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just looked at each other, the weight of it all sitting between us. We went into the living room, planning our next steps in hushed tones. I had already started packing a bag. We agreed that Aaron would take me to the police station and then bring someone back to the house. Quiet, controlled, safe. But before we could leave, I heard the front door click. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. Mark stepped inside, coat still in his hand, keys dangling between his fingers. "Hey," he said, startled to see Aaron. "What's going on?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're early." He glanced between us, his smile fading. "I forgot my tablet. Left it on the counter this morning." Aaron stepped forward smoothly. "I was just dropping off some tools. She said the sink's been leaking." Mark nodded slowly, eyes flicking toward my purse. I casually stepped in front of it, praying he didn't notice the way my hands shook. "Well," he said after a pause, "thanks, man. Appreciate it." Aaron gave a stiff smile. "No problem." We stood there for a beat, too long. Then Mark grabbed his tablet, kissed my cheek, and left again. The door shut. His car pulled away, and I crumpled to the floor. Aaron crouched beside me, gripping my hand tightly. "We're going now," he said. And this time, I didn't hesitate. We didn't go straight to the police that afternoon.
Not yet.
Aaron and I sat in his car for nearly an hour outside the station, hearts pounding, minds spinning. I told him everything, every suspicion, every moment I'd brushed off, every strange look or offhand comment that suddenly felt loaded. He listened without interrupting, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "We need more," he finally said. "If we hand over just that flash drive, there's a chance he spins it. Says it's a misunderstanding. Says it was planted. But if we get into his office, into the computer, I nodded slowly. I knew he was right. One piece of evidence wasn't enough, not against someone like Mark, someone so controlled, so calculated. The next morning, Mark left early for a meeting 2 towns over. I waited until I was sure he was gone, then texted Aaron. 20 minutes later, we were back in the house. Mark's office felt colder than the rest of the house, like it held its atmosphere. Sharp, clinical, silent. Aaron brought a small toolkit and worked quietly at the desk. I stood by the window, watching for any sign of Mark's return. When the drawer popped open, we found his laptop tucked behind some paperwork, its surface smudged from use. It was password protected, but not beyond Aaron's ability to guess. He tried a few combinations and finally hit it, our wedding date. The screen unlocked. At first, it looked ordinary. Spreadsheets, reports, a few family photos. But Aaron dug deeper, checking hidden folders and recently deleted files. That's when the real horror surfaced. Photos. Dozens of them. More disturbing than what I'd seen on the flash drive. Children. Some I recognized, neighborhood kids, Rosie, even the daughter of one of my coworkers. Taken in parks, at school events, sometimes zoomed in from behind bushes or across streets. There were chat logs, too, conversations with usernames I didn't recognize, full of coded language and references that made my stomach turn. I wanted to stop reading, but I couldn't. I had to know, had to see it for myself. Then Aaron found the notebook. It was hidden under the bottom drawer, taped to the underside like some kind of sick trophy. Inside were names, first names mostly. Next to each was an age, a location, sometimes a description. Likes pink shoes, sits alone at recess. Mom works late. I had to sit down. The room tilted.
Aaron didn't speak for a long time.
He just stared at the page, then at me. "We have enough," he said quietly. "This isn't just bad. This is monstrous." I nodded, my mouth dry. "Let's go." But as we packed the laptop and notebook, we heard it again, the sound that had haunted me only days before. The door is unlocking. Aaron's eyes met mine. No words, just action. We grabbed what we could and slipped out the back door just as Mark stepped into the kitchen. I heard his footsteps moving toward the hallway, toward the office, and I prayed he hadn't seen my car parked down the block. We ducked behind the neighbor's hedge and crouched there, both of us breathless. Aaron held the laptop tight to his chest. This time, there was no doubt. We were done being careful. Now, we were ready for war. That night, I didn't go back to the house. Aaron drove me straight to our parents' place, and for the first time in years, I told them everything. At first, they were quiet, stunned by the weight of what I laid out. Then came the horror. My mother cried softly, her hand pressed to her lips. My father just sat with his fists clenched on the table. And when Aaron opened the laptop and showed them what we'd found, the silence deepened. No one questioned it. No one defended him. Not this time. With their help, I packed a bag, only essentials. I didn't even take my wedding ring. Aaron stayed with me the entire time, never letting me out of his sight. We left a note on the kitchen counter. Not for Mark, but for the police, in case he came home before we returned with them. The next morning, we walked into the police station together. Detective Elena Rodriguez met us in a small, windowless room with faded chairs and a desk that looked like it had seen decades of confessions. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the story, how it started, the signs I'd missed, the photos, the notebook. Aaron handed over the flash drive and laptop. I placed the notebook on the table gently, as though touching it too hard would somehow make it worse. Detective Rodriguez didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't suggest it might be a misunderstanding. She simply nodded and said, "You did the right thing coming here." She took detailed notes and asked us to leave everything behind. "We're opening an investigation immediately," she said. "I'll personally oversee the case. And you need to be careful until we bring him in. Do not contact him. If he reaches out, call me." Immediately. I nodded. My heart felt like it had been in a fist for days, and for the first time, it began to unclench. Just a little. We went back to my parents' house, where I stayed in my old bedroom. My mother refused to let me out of her sight for the first 24 hours. Aaron checked the doors every night. I kept my phone close, waiting for a message, a threat, anything, but nothing came. Mark had vanished. Detective Rodriguez called 2 days later. He's not at home. His employer says he missed work. His phone's turned off. We've issued a warrant, and we're putting out a regional alert. The world narrowed in those days, down to the sound of my parents' footsteps in the hallway, the quiet clinking of dishes, the muted hum of the news in the background. Every time a car drove past the house, my breath caught. I didn't sleep much. Neither did Aaron. And then, a week later, the call came. He's been found, Detective Rodriguez said. We have him in custody. Mark had been hiding out in a motel 2 counties over under a false name. He was arrested without resistance. The items in his room matched what we'd already turned in: drives, files, notebooks. Enough to erase any doubt. I didn't cry when she told me. I thought I might. But instead, I just sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I looked out the window of my old room at the street where Aaron and I used to ride our bikes, where we'd once played with sidewalk chalk and eaten popsicles on the curb. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't the same. And I wasn't afraid anymore. Filing for the restraining order was the easy part. The moment the charges were official and Mark was denied bail, I walked into the courthouse with Detective Rodriguez's referral and came out with a thick folder of paperwork that said he could never come near me or our child again. Filing for divorce came next. I signed the documents with a hand that didn't tremble this time. I didn't flinch when they asked for details. I had facts now, evidence, and a truth I would never be afraid to speak again. What came after, though, was harder. The trauma lingered like a fog. Some mornings I'd wake up gasping, dreaming of Mark's voice behind me. I couldn't walk past a mirror without second-guessing the woman I saw there. I wondered how I could have loved someone like him, how I could have shared a life, a bed, a future. I blamed myself more than I admitted out loud. But slowly, quietly, I began to heal. Aaron was with me through everything. Every appointment, every court date. He even painted the nursery in the softest shade of sage green I'd ever seen, telling me, "She's going to grow up surrounded by safety, not secrets." My parents helped too, letting me cry when I needed to, feeding me when I forgot to eat, and reminding me I wasn't broken, just bruised. And when the test came back positive, I sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the word pregnant, and felt both terrified and fiercely protective. I thought about ending it, about starting over completely, without the shadow of him growing inside me. But then I heard the smallest voice in my head, not Mark's, not my own. Something new, something soft. And I knew I was keeping her. Months passed. The court moved forward. Mark's trial was scheduled. I went to therapy. I started walking every morning, feeling her kicks grow stronger. I found strength in places I didn't know I had, especially on the nights I held my belly and whispered promises I hadn't yet figured out how to keep. And then, on a quiet morning in early spring, she arrived.
Hope.
That's what I named her. She had my eyes, my mother's hands. Aaron cried when he held her. And I, for the first time in a very long time, felt whole again. A few months after Hope was born, I signed the lease on a small, sunlit house at the edge of town. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a squeaky porch swing, a yard that needed work, but it was mine.
Ours.
The first night we slept there, Hope curled on my chest. I lay awake listening to the quiet. No footsteps.
No second-guessing.
Just the steady rhythm of her breathing and the faint creak of the swing outside. My parents came over every day at first, helping unpack boxes and baby-proof the place. Aaron installed cameras around the house and showed me how to check the feed from my phone. He even replaced every lock twice. Just in case, he said, and I didn't argue. I still checked the doors 3 times before bed. Sometimes 4. But it was better than before. Safer.
Real.
Therapy continued, week after week. I started bringing Hope with me, holding her on my lap as I untangled memories that once left me raw. The guilt, the fear, the shame of not seeing it sooner. My therapist reminded me, over and over, that monsters don't wear masks. They wear wedding rings. They say, I love you like they mean it. And some, like Mark, plan every move long before you ever notice. It was in therapy that I first allowed myself to believe what Detective Rodriguez had confirmed during the investigation. Mark had chosen me,
Studied me.
built our relationship on manipulation and subtle control. Even our first meeting, the way he accidentally bumped into me at a bookstore, wasn't a coincidence. He'd known who I was, who my brother was, where I came from. I wasn't just unlucky. I was targeted. That truth shook me. But it also freed me, because now I could name it. And once I named it, I could start rebuilding from the ground up. I made a list one night after putting Hope to bed, tiny things that brought me peace. Warm socks, clean sheets, her tiny laugh, Aaron's ridiculous texts, my mother's tea. I pinned the list to the fridge. Each day, I added one more thing. Each day, I felt a little more like myself again. Hope deserved a life without fear. And so did I. It had been nearly a year since Mark's arrest, and life was starting to feel steady again. Hope was learning to walk, babbling through the house in her tiny voice, and I'd even started working remotely part-time. The quiet had become a comfort instead of a warning. For the first time, the air didn't feel like it was about to break. Then the letter came. It wasn't from Mark, not directly. It was from a man named Douglas Pierce, someone I didn't know. The envelope looked ordinary, with no return address, but inside was a typed message that chilled me to my core. It began with polite small talk, pretending to be some distant friend of Mark's, but the tone quickly shifted. He spoke about regrets, about how Mark still cared deeply, about forgiveness and family, and how one day, your daughter deserves to know both sides. The phrasing was strange, careful, and almost rehearsed. But it was unmistakably Mark. His words, his rhythm, his manipulation, filtered through another man. I felt nauseous just holding it. I took the letter straight to the police. Detective Rodriguez called me back, within hours. Douglas Pierce is a known associate, she said. They met inside. He's been helping Mark communicate with others he can't legally contact. Me, I whispered. You and Hope, she confirmed. We'll be issuing a new no-contact order immediately, and we'll be speaking to the prison about enforcement. It was a slap of reality. Mark might be behind bars, but his reach hadn't disappeared. He was still trying to manipulate, to weasel his way back in, even if he had to do it through someone else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by Hope's crib, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, and felt that old tightness in my lungs again. But instead of breaking down, I got up and made a list. Names of lawyers. Security contacts. I installed another layer of alerts on the cameras. I contacted my therapist. I called Aaron. And the next morning, I filed for expanded protections, this time with Hope named explicitly. A paper shield, yes, but a necessary one. Mark had tried to reach into our lives again. And I made sure the door was locked tighter than ever before. 2 years after everything, I packed up our little house and moved back to Oregon. It felt full circle somehow, to return to the place where it all began, but this time on my terms. The air smelled like cedar and rain, and the mornings were quieter, softer. I found a small house just outside of town, nestled among pine trees, with a garden already blooming from the last tenant's care. Hope loved it instantly. She'd chase butterflies barefoot through the yard, her laughter echoing through the trees, light and free. We started over slowly. I found work with a local nonprofit, something meaningful that let me spend my afternoons with Hope. I made friends. I joined a parent group. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. That's when I met Joseph. He was gentle in every way, but Mark never was. He showed up without expectations, without pressure. He smiled with his whole face. He let Hope talk for 20 minutes about caterpillars and didn't once look away. I kept my distance at first, understandably cautious. But he was patient.
Kind.
Unshakably real. Over time, he became part of our world. He never tried to take Mark's place. He didn't have to. Hope chose him. One night, curled up between us on the couch, she looked up at him and said, "You can be my dad if you want." Joseph's eyes filled, And mine did too. We got married in a small ceremony by the lake.
Just family.
Aaron stood beside me as I walked down the aisle, holding my hand the way he had through every storm. My parents cried. Hope tossed flower petals with more excitement than accuracy. And Joseph, he just smiled like his whole world was right there in front of him. I still go to therapy. I still check the locks, though not every night. Mark is behind bars, and the past is where it belongs. I don't forget. But I don't live in fear anymore. I live in gratitude for the daughter who saved me, for the brother who never gave up on me, and for the life I reclaimed. We're safe now. We're home.